mouse though.
The mouse. Yeah.
Does this work? Yeah, it works. It works.
And you have that, I don't know where it is, the
Clicker.
remote, yes.
Yes. Where did that go?
Well, in case you need it. Yeah, it's not
I want to walk around, man. Let's see. Did I put it in my pocket? What the hell? I don't seem to have it. Unless I have it. No, I don't have it.
No, no?
No, maybe ask the guy. Ask Alberto.
Maybe it will, sorry, it will work. So it has this thing. So. No, it should, it might be.
So, ver.
Vale. For the one with the presentation.
Yeah, I think I got it.
Yeah. Sí, no, ha salido.
Yeah, I think we're good. We're
Okay.
ready. Hello. Let's see. I like to walk around. Do we have a mic to walk around or no? Oh man, forgot. Okay, welcome everybody. So my name is Marcin, founder of Open Source Ecology, and let's start the show here. So what I'll do is start with a classic TED Talk which I did in 2011, just in case anybody hasn't seen it. And then I'll update on the progress of Open Source Ecology, what we have done there, and particularly about the challenges and the way forward from here as far as what we have. So start with 4 minutes right here from 2011, which explains the overview of the whole project in a quick way. So the whole picture.
Hi, my name is Marcin, farmer, technologist. I was born in Poland, now in the US. I started a group called Open Source Ecology. We've identified the 50 most important machines that we think takes for modern life to exist. Things from tractors, bread ovens, circuit makers. Then we set out to create an open source, DIY, do-it-yourself version that anyone can build and maintain at a fraction of the cost. We call this the Global Village Construction Set. So let me tell you a story. So I finished my 20s with a PhD in fusion energy, and I discovered I was useless. I had no practical skills. I mean, the world presented me with options, and I took them. I guess you can call it the consumer lifestyle. So I started a farm in Missouri and learned about the economics of farming. I bought a tractor, then it broke. I paid to get it repaired, then it broke again. And pretty soon, I was broke too. I realized that the truly appropriate low-cost tools that I needed to start a sustainable farm and settlement just didn't exist yet. I needed tools that were robust, modular, highly efficient and optimized, low cost, made from local and recycled materials that would last a lifetime, not designed for obsolescence. I found that I would have to build them myself. So I did just that. And I tested them. And I found that industrial productivity can be achieved on a small scale. So then I published the 3D designs, schematics, instructional videos, and budgets on a wiki. Then contributors from all over the world began showing up, prototyping new machines during dedicated project visits. So far we have prototyped 8 of the 50 machines, and now the project is beginning to grow on its own. We know that open source has succeeded with tools for managing knowledge and creativity, and the same is starting to happen with hardware too. We're focusing on hardware because it is hardware that can change people's lives in such tangible material ways. If we can lower the barriers to farming, building, manufacturing, then we can unleash just massive amounts of human potential. That's not only in the developing world. Our tools are being made for the American farmer, builder, entrepreneur, maker. We've seen lots of excitement from these people who can now start a construction business, parts manufacturing, organic CSA, or just selling power back to the grid. Our goal is a repository of published designs so clear, so complete that a single burned DVD is effectively a civilization starter kit. I've planted 100 trees in a day. I've pressed 5,000 bricks in one day from the dirt beneath my feet, and built a tractor in 6 days. From what I've seen, this is only the beginning. If this idea is truly sound, then the implications are significant. A greater distribution of the means of production, environmentally sound supply chains, and a newly relevant DIY maker culture can hope to transcend artificial scarcity. We're exploring the limits of what we all can do to make a better world with open hardware technology. Thank you.
All right. So now for a little background on that story. So I was born in Poland, a small country in the middle of Europe that surrounded by powerful neighbors. And when I left in 1982. I was 10 years old. And that is the scene on the streets of my hometown of Poznań. So That's not a parade, that's the real scene of material scarcity behind the Iron Curtain. It wasn't a fun time. But then we moved to America and things got better. So I went to Princeton, then graduated from University of Wisconsin-Madison in fusion energy. And just amazing thing, you have two countries, you got Poland, you got America. So one thing you learn is, wow, what a difference just the environment, can make in the political system. How do you have an abundance of resources? Similar climates and resource bases, but one country is just suffering and another one is really prosperous. That really made a striking impression on me. So, well, I continued my education, wanted to do good things with science. My father's a scientist, so always thought about the power of knowledge and technology to change people's lives for the better. But then instead, I discovered that I was useless, as I said. The farther I went, just the more irrelevant I felt to solving pressing world issues. I studied fusion and I wanted to discover a new source of energy, fusion energy, that the joke goes right now, well, it's 10 years in the future, it always was and it always will be. But I learned some interesting things at that time, though. The thing I did learn is that because I was studying energy, that, okay, why am I pursuing fusion? I started to question that and definitely got quite alienated from that whole program once I started to ask questions, because then I would give presentations about fusion, doing public outreach, and people would ask me, well, what about, like, for example, the radioactivity or other issues? And I said, well, it's not that bad, but no, there's issues in fusion and we don't really have great solutions right now. And I started thinking, well, what are some easier options? And that's when I started thinking about the abundance of solar energy, because I don't know if you know that the Earth currently receives about 10,000 times more power from the sun than we use today. So why are we pursuing these crazy things when we can just tap that and maybe focus on, say, solar energy? So I started to question I started to question appropriate technology. What is that? How can we really do better and solve the myth of technology? Because with all this advanced technology that we have today, lives are not so much easier. People still work really hard, long weekdays, and a lot of people in the world don't have it as well as in advanced countries. So, and then I also found out about Linux at that time. So that was my entry into the world of open source, in which I believe so much. But a guy told me about Linux, an operating system that he could just download from the internet. It was free. You could customize it quite a bit. And at that time, we were using all Macs. And in our research group, I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. So there are all these other options that we have. It's not only that which is set in front of you that is the only thing. And in fact, there are so many different things available. Technologies are, as I like to say, the future is already here, but it's not evenly distributed. There's things that could work, but the system makes it such a way. So I started questioning everything about technology, got quite alienated. But the thing that really kind of tipped me into the kind of the world of abundance, or thinking about real solutions besides what I was studying, which was really alienating to me, is I actually took a lifestyle engineering course where I learned to breathe, meditate, do Indian cooking and all of that. And I pretty much kind of started to think on my own and disconnected from the group, and with starting to meditate and think about what's really important. Why are we here? What are we trying to do? So there it is. There was Linux there, with which now dominates. At that time, Linux was hardly known. That was maybe early 2000. But right now, Linux is, of course, the dominant operating system. It runs about 99% of all the servers. In other words, just about anything you see on the internet is Linux-powered, open source servers, and all of that. But one thing I also remember from the grad school experience is that I actually could not talk openly about the research that I was doing. And I was like, what? So we had some really good materials, hot material that we actually could not tell to other groups because they would take it and maybe publish papers and get funding in front of us. And I was like, wow, what a waste. We're in a public institution. We're trying to benefit the whole world, yet we're not even able to collaborate with other people. And I felt my education was compromised by that. I couldn't really learn. I couldn't share information, and I couldn't get information from others. So that really struck me as something odd, and I questioned that to the point that in the last year of my PhD program, I actually started open source ecology in 2003 to ask a simple question. Well, what does it look like if we truly collaborate? Because I certainly was seeing that we weren't in our research, and if we weren't that in a public institution, I was sure that in other places, maybe industry or wherever, secrecy and other forms of competitive waste must be the norm. So I wanted to do something about that. And that was how the natural evolution came from open source, starting to apply the principles to open hardware as tangible objects in our lives, and then to creating a whole society that's based on open collaboration. Just really curious what that would look like. I thought that was really powerful to pursue that because certainly there was a lot of competitive waste and warfare and other ills in a world that were worth solving, and our current ways weren't really doing that. So I moved to the middle of nowhere in Missouri. That's our site before anything was out there. We have about 30 acres, 15 hectares. That is the ultimate open source hardware. That's the land from which all the wealth of the economy comes. So start to build things out of need a lot. Primarily because we needed a place to live, so we built a house the first year just out of earth bags. We built an earth bag hut, and then I started thinking about, okay, how could we make it easy, because it was hard work. So I thought about, okay, that's how the compressed earth block press came about. It was, okay, if we have a need for housing, here's an industrial machine that could produce thousands of bricks in a day. You can build yourself a house pretty easily. So a lot of it was need. And then I said, okay, if I'm solving this problem for myself, why not publish all of this and help anyone else who has the same issue with that? And what I found is that people soon started collaborating and replicating our work, such as this guy in Peru building one of our designed tractors, these students in Pasadena, high school students that just built our tractor just off the plans online. So what is this open source stuff? The critical aspect is that open source refers to the blueprints and all the other enabling information that allows a hardware product to be replicated. Source code is easy to understand for software, where of course it's the lines of code that execute something. But for hardware, it will be the instructions, primarily the 3D CAD and other assets that allow you to replicate something. So you have the freedom to examine the blueprints, modify them, use them, or sell them. The last thing of selling being very important, because if people are going to work on this, you need to make a living somehow. So why not make a livelihood from open hardware? And I'll talk more about our increased definition of what open source really means to us in terms of how you really get open source hardware into the economic playing field, which has challenges right now. So open hardware could be things like 3D printers. That's our 3D printer, satellites, space satellites, CubeSat, open source drones, laser cutters, or heavy machines like we build, the open source ecology tractor, or a greenhouse, Aquapana greenhouse that we build, all based on open source blueprints, or this house, which we built in 5 days with 50 people using our swarm build process. Point is, you can download these blueprints and you can build exactly what you see right there from fully documented blueprints if you have the tools and materials to do so. But the real question is answering this little question. Does anyone know what that means? 85 equals 3.5. This is back from a few years ago, but that says that 85 of the world's richest people own as much wealth as 3.5 billion at the bottom of the pyramid. So what we're seeing is that in a world of incredible productivity, the wealth is not well distributed. There's mega rich people and a lot of people left behind in poverty still. So that's the aspect of the economy that we're trying to solve through open source. How do you distribute economic productivity, which is the basis of thriving or not thriving? Because a lot of issues around today, from resource conflicts to us having to work for a living to how much time we spend at work, I mean, that's all related to material scarcity or material security. We have not really solved that question for many people. There's plenty of people that are really underprivileged and don't have enough to eat or a place to sleep or a home or whatever. So huge question. So in our work, one of the things we had to do was say, okay, if we're going to make do with open hardware, it has to be efficient. So we learned, one major milestone we reached was learning how to build our heavy machines in a single day. So that's a huge milestone. We found we could do that. And how do you do that? Well, if the blueprints are open, you get yourself a bunch of people, you work together as a team. That's the team that built the first, the brick press in a single day back in, I think that was 2012. How do you do it? IKEA-style fabrication diagrams. It's very simple procedures that are easy for people to understand. You have a swarm build process. This is on a house build project, but basically we designed the machine to be very modular so that a lot of people can work at the same time on independent modules. As long as you know how they fit together, then you can assemble them pretty rapidly at the end. And that's how we're able to do that. So we're able to build a house like this in 3 days with like 12 people or so. That's actually made from the compressed earth blocks where you see the brick press in the back there. Or a house like this, which we built in 5 days with 50 people. Or a tractor, micro tractor like this, which we built in 3 days. So one thing that I mentioned that enables this process is the radical modularity, the breakdown into modules. So we take each machine, we break it down into about a dozen modules, and then for each module we go through a whole set of different development steps, from the conceptual design requirements, the technical design diagrams, build instructions, bills of materials, and everything else that's the required blueprints for making some object, turning it to life. So it's modular project architecture, and we found that this works really well. You can have a large team work together in parallel using online tools. We also found that there's revenue in this. So for example, the brick press. We can build one over a weekend, we can sell that, we can charge people for attendance for an immersion learning experience, and altogether we can pull in about 10,000 net revenue over a weekend workshop. So we've seen that this kind of an economic model works. So we call that extreme manufacturing, the social group build processes which are combining education with production in one, so you can have those two revenue streams. For example, for the 3D printer, we can build 12 of these in a day. Say 12 people sign up for a workshop. They all build a printer to take home with them, and we charge them like $300 over the bill of materials. We've seen this kind of model work. Digital fabrication means that we use 3D printed parts, CNC cut frames, so it's easy to assemble. It's also very basic design using common off-the-shelf parts to make that work. On a seed eco home with aquaponic greenhouse, which we built. So we held a big workshop with 50 people paying $500 each. So there's 25,000 in revenue, which is decent. And our goal is to be able to sell one of these as a turnkey product for about 70,000 or so. So you have to include all the logistics and all the aspects. But basically the people are coming in for a workshop to help us build that. And we're discovering there's revenue models that work, that can be created around this. So next milestone for this is to turn this into a product that we can provide to anybody, which we're not there yet. So one of the critical aspects of open hardware is the documentation. In order to replicate builds, you need documentation. And that's really hard to do because if you're building, you don't want to spend the time documenting and writing things. The build is hard enough. So sometimes what we do is We have shown how you can go on Google Docs with remote cameras, that people are participating, actually viewing the build during the workshop, such that at the same time that we build the actual device, they publish an instructional. So we've seen that that can work, and that's an amazing thing, because otherwise you lose the documentation. But there are definitely cultural barriers. Collaboration is not easy. We're culturally not adjusted to collaborating. Like Yochai Benkler, one of these the open source scholars, he talks about that we don't think that you can do anything without intellectual property. It's like people think that intellectual property is a law of nature. You can't start a business without it. But that's not true. It's not a natural law. It's just another one of the human creations that we have created as a society. And that's what happens today. But other options are possible. And I put a slide about perseverance. It's a long haul. Open hardware development is a huge effort. It probably takes about $1 million worth of value to create any of the products that we're working on. It's a full-fledged engineering and documentation project, especially for posting everything and publishing all the blueprints and allowing for constant evolution to happen. It costs money. But we did find that still some people can replicate, but while people can replicate, and that's the first ever replication of the brick press. So someone just emailed me this. I was like, wow, hey, that looks like a Photoshop copy of my machine, but no, it's not. It's the real thing. He built it exactly off our plans and looks exactly like our early models. So that's great, but this has not really taken off to where people are starting businesses or actually manufacturing these things. That's one of the huge things that we're finding, is that how difficult it is. We have to develop the working enterprise models as well, which is part of the current endeavors that we're taking on to show not only the blueprint for the machine, but also for the enterprise. So here's another brick press that someone built for Africa. Here's another picture I got sent from some people in Nicaragua, and that appears to be 2 of our brick presses and 4 power cubes and a brick production facility without us knowing. So yeah, things can happen by open documentation, but there are limits that we've seen so far to how much that replicates in the enterprise sense. Now, radical modularity is one of the keys. So we reuse a lot of parts in order to create a whole product ecology of different tools. This helps you recycle, helps you create lifetime design. But for example, like all that box beam tubing can be used in other machines. There's wheel units that we use in other machines, other details like the power cube, which is the engine unit, which can be used to power just about anything in a set. The box beam tubing can be used to make frames for, say, a CNC torch table, an iron worker machine, a machine that cuts slabs of metal like 1 inch thick. Same kind of tubing is used, just bolts and tubing. Universal rotor, which in this picture is used to drive this huge trencher. But the same thing, same modular wheel unit is used on the wheels to drive the wheels. So you're using a lot of common parts so that the whole system becomes really manageable, and a person or enterprise can manage all of that at much, much lower cost. So if you think about, okay, if you're using something not in one machine, but like 5 or 10 machines, your cost just went down 10 times. Now, it does take the time for you to interchange things, but if you make the design modular enough and you put a lot of attention to the interface design, then that can be practical, and we've seen it. I mean, we've reused the wheel units on multiple tractors and so forth, or like a tiller like this using the same universal rotor. Now, the radical modularity allows us to reduce the prototyping times from months to days. So here's a great example. We built this iron worker machine, which is a device to cut slabs of steel 1 by 12 inches thick. It took us 6 months to build that thing. It's got a lot of complexity in it. And I said, well, no way. If it takes 6 months, we can never make this feasible. Nobody will have the time. It would cost too much money. So we redesigned it to the absolute simplest thing, a bunch of kind of lever arms with a pivot and a very sharp blade. And we found that we could also cut 1 by 10 steel with that. We actually did destructive testing, so we went all the way up to 1x12 steel, in which point the top bar is kind of bent out of shape. But yeah, so yeah, things like backhoe that uses the same kind of tubing. Everything is a construction set. So you can do construction set for mechanical things. You can do that for power electronics, for controls. There's really no limits to what the construction set approach can do for you, meaning you use a common set of parts, a very limited set that can be used for just about anything. And we are, as I mentioned, some of the revenue model that we're developing, we call it extreme manufacturing, a combination of extreme builds, which are really rapid, many people involved, social production events, where you also get to learn a lot because you can participate in just about everything throughout the process. You can switch between tasks. So we're finding that that can actually work, like building a house or an aquaponic greenhouse like this, which has fish in it and water drips through the top. Like, for example, building those towers. If you have 40 people, each one can do one of them, and you're done with all the towers in 30 minutes. They're homemade. We cut them and took a heat gun to them in a bottle, like a ketchup bottle, and reamed out holes. So, you make that. But if you have parallel design, you can build things pretty fast. So we're finding that that's working. So Linux has won the battle, but it kind of lost the war, I would say, in a sense of the distribution question. So the distribution of wealth. Why do I say that? Well, let's talk about the challenges of open hardware. Like before, Microsoft used to hate open source. They were highly proprietary. Now Microsoft is the #1 developer of open software. That's amazing. That's because companies have just seen, it just makes sense. You lower your development costs. You make better products, faster to market. You don't spend all the time reinventing the wheel. It's just natural. But that hasn't happened for hardware. And even in software, the benefit of that, while many people have benefited, there's still even further concentration of wealth that's happening with mega corporations like Amazon and Facebook or Google and everyone else, Microsoft, who are writing from open source software so they can make a proprietary model on top of open source. So you can't say that amazing promise of the amazing economy and distribution of wealth and power has happened as a result of open source software. The potential is there, but that's not really how it happened. So in practical terms, right now, open hardware is like literally non-existent. Like it's just not in human culture. It's about 0.1%. It's like 1/1,000,000th of the economy. The global economy is about 100 trillion. Open hardware projects total to about 100 million, which is 1,000,000th fraction of that, compared to 4% in open source software. And that 4% of the overall economy is pretty much all of the software industry. They know that they go to GitHub and they pick from existing repositories and build upon them and then make business models on top of that. Some of the advantages, just simply lower capital costs. It was easier for software to do this, partly because when you talk about hardware, hardware is based on perhaps 200 years since the Industrial Revolution of proprietary development. Whereas software has actually started as open source. The early hackers from MIT and elsewhere, they all shared code. That was just a natural part of the culture. So in software, that culture was well established and was able to spread, but it's just really an intellectual block for hardware. Because you would think, okay, if software is now dominating everything, like all the projects, you're building on a common pool of design. Well, why isn't it happening to hardware? So there's some other effects. I mean, the feasibility or the possibility is clearly there. And the way I think about it, thinking about this in detail, I think a good explanation is the entrenched history, basically since the steam engine was invented 200 years ago, it was all patents. And that's well in shape today. I mean, everything is patented right now, just about. So open culture is not spreading to hardware. And that's my claim after analyzing this. My wife, Katerina Mota, she's an open source hardware scholar. She wrote a thesis about this topic, and her conclusion is that, yeah, it's largely about the cultural mindset. It's not about the feasibility, the economic feasibility. It's the culture we live in. Now, we focus on hardware, and the impact of hardware is just so much more. It can change people's lives in tangible ways. As I mentioned, it's about 10 times larger than software. So if you look at the real numbers within the economy today, software is about a $2 trillion industry altogether. Hardware is about 23 trillion, all the other hardware-related things, primary and secondary sectors. That means resource extraction and then agriculture, manufacturing. That's about 23 trillion total. That's all the physical reality that we enjoy, all the infrastructures and products that we use. 10 times more than software, so definite huge potential. And then there's a whole service economy building on top of that, which is even bigger. Resources are very important. I'm not sure I need to emphasize that. But war, poverty, corruption, governments, it's all about how you distribute resources, right? The current model is what I call the redistributive model. What we like to talk about is distributive enterprise, meaning that when we run a business, we try to distribute the wealth as much as possible. But instead, the current model is that you'd like to redistribute. So you pay that money back to the governments as taxes, who then redistribute that to various programs, or corporations that throw some crumbs off the table for social projects. But instead of this kind of model, how can we reframe the economy so the wealth already comes out there to the people in the first place? So that's just a point to think about. So one of the challenges in open hardware is the ambiguity of what exactly the source code is in open hardware compared to open software. So currently there is no solid definition of open hardware. I mean, there is, but it's largely as guidelines. The Open Source Hardware Association from the United States has defined open hardware. So there's a technical definition that based on the 4 freedoms of software, which says that you have the right to inspect the source code, the blueprints, to modify them, to make them as real objects, or sell the products. But what exactly is sufficient for you to build something? Well, on one side, the design, it seems like, but that is not enough. And all the other elements required to bring something to life in the physical world there's many more aspects, and that's not really defined well. So part of the issue is that we're not really clear about what open hardware means, because to us, open hardware is other aspects. I'll talk about that. So distribution of wealth. Who knows the Gini coefficient? Has someone heard of that? That's a very important thing, at least from our perspective, but that's the metric that shows how much wealth, what the wealth distribution is between people. 0 means that it goes between 0 and 1. 0 is when everybody in the world has the equivalent amount of wealth. 1 is when one world ruler has all the wealth of the world. We're actually at about 0.7. Oh, that's getting cut off a little bit. It's about 0.7 in today's history. So we're at about 2000 right there. The new red dots are a new data set. It seems to indicate that it's lower. It's still pretty high, about 0.7. Which is not great. Historically, it's been as low as like 0.3 or 0.4, but it's like way worse than before the industrial age. So obviously, there's huge concentration of capital. And the 85 figure I mentioned before, it actually is getting a little worse. How many of the world's billionaires own as much wealth as the 1/2 at the bottom of the pyramid? Well, in 2017, 8 of the world's richest people has as much wealth as the 3.5 billion at the bottom of the pyramid. That's pretty insane. That's the reality. You get more wealthy billionaires, whereas before you might have only like a few billion. Now you have like tens of billions and stuff as the richest person in the world. So the Gini index, I can't really tell how much it's improving, but the potential is for it to go down. I mean, it's not super encouraging. The lower 50% of the world got 41% poorer in recent history than between 2010 and 2015. So this amazing internet economy, it's questionable how well it's working. And of course, there's many people who benefited. We wouldn't be here without the internet so that we could collaborate with people worldwide. Definitely there's positive impact that's possible, but it is only the beginning. Now, who knows this guy? Richard Stallman. He founded the Free Software Foundation. He defined what free software is like. Forget about open hardware, it doesn't mean anything. But that's really not true, and I should actually enter into a debate with him. He emailed me one time, but he's kind of hard to communicate with. But no social imperative for free hardware, like in software. Or we don't have automatic copiers for hardware. Well, all these statements can be debated. We can say that because hardware is 10 times more the value of and can change people's lives in such profound ways, of course there's a huge imperative to end war, conflict, resource conflicts. That's what war is. I mean, the impact can be huge. So I don't really know what he's talking about that. And we don't have automatic copiers for hardware. Well, with 3D printing and digital fabrication, that's not really the case. And as technology gets better and we get molecular assemblers and advanced technology, which is just a matter of time, with that statement will be completely untrue. But this figure, Richard Stallman, is well respected in the community, and even people like him, the founder of open source, doesn't think open hardware is relevant to human prosperity. Well, the culture is not there. History of Freedom 101. So I like to look at freedom as, when I talk about open source, I really talk about freedom, because that's the end goal. I mean, why are we doing this? It's about gaining the freedom to pursue self-determination, to do what's really important to you in your life, not that you have to make a living doing something. It's about meaning, autonomy, mastery, purpose, self-determination. We've had major strides in freedom throughout the world. Slavery was abolished. I would call rise of Linux as a pretty important point for freedom, software freedom. I do think that, the 60s maybe you had the environmental issues coming up, so the freedom from material resource destruction. But I think the open source economy is one of the greatest freedoms we can produce in the fact of distributing wealth in a better way than happens today. Because one of the great challenges of poor wealth distribution is a lot of the ills that happen today. So material security is great. Okay, so how do you make money doing hardware? How do we transition to the next economy? So that's the question we're addressing. It's a big question. Now, open hardware it's actually 1/1,000,000th of the economy. And a simple calculation shows the tipping point would be about 1%. If we attain about 1% of open source hardware, we will have reached a tipping point. Okay, how do I get this 1% number? So I do some basic math that says tipping point theory, if you get 10% of people doing something, then the whole economy follows, okay? Now, 30% of the world's economy is hardware. So we mentioned the primary sectors, natural resources, manufacturing, that's the hardware economy. Outside of that is software and the service industry, but about 30% is hardware. And people's salaries, like the value of the entire economy, about half of that is hardware, because salaries go half to labor, half to materials. So I'm coming up with a figure. If you take global GDP times the tipping point, times the part that's hardware, times the salaries, part of salaries that's related to hardware. Does that make sense? But I'm coming up with $1 trillion, which is 1% of the economy. That's kind of a rough figure for saying, okay, if that much open hardware got out there, that is achieving the 10% tipping point. So we got to get to the $1 trillion economy, people. That's the explanation of the 30% of the material economy. So let's start by defining, what is the open source economy? Well, our vision, the way we like to define it, is it's about collaborative design for a transparent and inclusive economy of abundance. So there's a lot of meaning packed in there. So collaborative, that's a big word. Designing things as in designing hardware or other systems. Could be enterprises, could be institutions. Transparent, so that's the open source part. Transparent as opposed to hidden and potentially evil if you can't look under the hood to see what's going on. There's a lot of things that can go on. Inclusive, we need to include everybody, including poor people, including nature and the natural resources that support us. So we need an inclusive economy. Byproducts are elimination of artificial scarcity. I call it artificial scarcity because an abundance of all the natural resources that we have and the amount of power that comes from the sun, which is 10,000 times more than we have today, than we use today, even in a pretty wasteful economy today. The sun still shines about 10,000 times more power. There's absolutely no first principle reasons why scarcity is abundant today. That's why I call it artificial scarcity. It's not a real scarcity, it's just how we run things, poor design, and institutions that enforce things being a certain way. So we talk about distributive enterprise. So in the definition of open source hardware, which is not super clear, we include what we call distributive enterprise. So what is that? What are the other elements that you need in order to really build a product? So it's some other elements. If you have the blueprints, you also need to have bills of materials. You need to have open source production engineering. How do you actually take that information and convert it to real goods? You'd have to have some measure of quality control. So you can define things like if you have build instructions, you can list a bunch of procedures you need to take in order to make it work exactly, or you are using a common set of tools to build what you're open sourcing. Sourcing information is critical. That's the bills of materials. Distribution channels. I mean, when you make something, how do you push it out to the world? I mean, right now a lot of that is somewhat hidden, and it's not really open information. That's one of the things we've noticed. Yeah, we can produce these amazing things in a day, but since about the 1920s, overproduction has been around, so it's easy to produce but not easy to sell. There's excess production, so you need to have distribution channels, and you have to have marketing, licensing, and startup training. So if you have all of this, then you can take open blueprints and actually make a living out of them. Open source enterprises that can be viable and stand and replicate. Because the idea is there's many industries out there. Why are hundreds or different people just competing with each other to produce the same product? I mean, naturally, there's a lot of competitive waste involved in that. Why does it happen like that? And there's no need for that. Certain industries will imagine that a lot of people collaborated, the products are better, and everyone just uses the best design. I mean, that would be great. That's not what happens today, and one can argue whether that's good or bad, but clearly, I mean, there's a lot of reinvention of the wheel, and I think most people don't really like that. It increases costs and everything like that. So our next step is to do an incentive challenge, a proof of concept of how true open source development could work. because this is missing. This is pretty much sorely missing, even though 3D printers are all out there, which are based on open source, but still not a great case for showing us. So what we're trying to do is do an incentive challenge to produce a professional grade open source cordless drill, also made from recycled materials. That means we have filament making infrastructure as part of the production machines that are also open source that allow you to build this professional grade cordless drill. That's going to be our next challenge that we're going to launch in September of 2020. So we're preparing for this. We're looking at $250,000 to fund this as the reward, and we'll reward based on collaboration and people working together. So the incentive is to be completely open source, transparent, and distribute the enterprise, including developing the enterprise assets that I mentioned, like the production engineering, like marketing and distribution, because those are all the aspects that you need in order to succeed in producing something and actually make a living out of that. So we're going to push the limits of crowd development to a fully open source product that we intend to many people, for anyone who wants to do that, to take it up. You know, you're in a city and wherever, somewhere, start producing drills. Drills are a $10 billion market worldwide. There's certainly huge demand for cordless drills. So we're choosing a simple 3D printable product that a lot of people can get involved in a design to do a proof of concept. Because if this can work in a cordless drill case using open source 3D printers and other machines, then there's a likelihood that we can do this for other more complicated and larger things as well. Anything. There's not really a limit to what can be done. Just a simple idea that we're working together as opposed to competing. So step 2, I call it distributed market substitution. So that is where more than 50% of a given industry is transformed fully to open source. So that is our goal. We'd like to see that in 3 years, more than 50% of the cordless drill industry is open source. Can we do it? We'll try, and we invite you to do that. So that's something that a lot of you here can get involved in. Hopefully we can get some collaboration going on doing that. But that's a worthwhile thing to do, and is that possible? We'll create a data point to see what the challenges are and how that goes. So if you, once again, if you succeed in one market, you can succeed in others. In other words, way greater distribution of the means of production, like I mentioned, so way greater distribution of wealth. Right now, there's like 4 or so major brands in the cordless drill industry that have a majority of the market. Well, what if people can collaborate more widely on that and many more people can capture more of that wealth? Because, for example, like if you're a designer, you can get paid by a company to design their cordless drill. But if you can end up manufacturing that, your revenue or your potential is just much greater. The amount of wealth created is if you can actually own that design is great. So we're distributing the blueprints to anybody. Because for a standard designer, you don't actually keep the design, you sell that to the company, and they pay you for that. So the incentive could in fact be much greater by virtue of the amount of wealth that can be created from this open model. See you in Oslo. It's a Nobel Peace Prize for transforming the economy if that ever happens. But let's talk about the theory of change. What are we trying to do here? Our mission is greater, and that is we're not about developing technologies per se. It's about developing people, creating a shift in human culture to collaboration. And I do believe that without eradicating artificial scarcity, we're just too busy and preoccupied with other things to really have an honest chance to develop as human beings, to spend time with family, to learn about ourselves, to learn about psychology, learn about many different things that we might otherwise be reduced from. We don't have the time for many things that we'd like to do. So the ultimate goal for me, at least, is absolute freedom, to be free of constraints to design and build the world that I want to live in. And I think the strong incentive for people to, that simple idea that, yeah, you're creating the world around you, not some engineers or remote people who just dictate from the top down. it's about all of us, so simple democratization of the technosphere, which is democratization of our lifestyles, how everything happens. And the way we envision that is open source local microfactories where there's an abundance of open source designs that are available to everybody, and they can be produced in local microfactories that have fully open source equipment, and people can collaborate globally to develop a network of such local microfactories all over the world, and everyone wins in that case. Our current model of how do we build up this infrastructure, first of all, we have a facility in Kansas, near Kansas City, Missouri. But how could other people build this? And we're thinking that just like we're doing these extreme builds with many people, what if we did a 3-month summer of extreme design build? And that's our current plan for next year, next summer, 3 months, 24 people. People are paying us to do this immersion experience, and we're building infrastructure at the same time. We're building a lot of crazy things, useful infrastructure elements. The people are essentially funding the revolution, or funding the materials and everything else. So we're looking at a bootstrap-funded model where anyone can replicate this. You don't have to have capital, access to capital to make this happen. You're doing as earn-as-you-go model, and say you charge people $3,000 for a month, like in America, that's quite feasible. Summer camps cost like $3,000 to $6,000 in America. But, can we try that? Use the extreme manufacturing techniques of swarm group builds, open education, that kind of a model where it's like going to school, like university, except you're doing really tangible things. So, and we know there's a market for education, so that's the kind of model we're going to try. But if you think about it, imagine if all the students all over the world were working on open projects as their class assignments. Well, that doesn't happen right now. It's a lot of times industry funds things in the universities. A lot of times the industry just uses the universities as their R&D branches. So a lot of those results are actually not going out into the open source. They're being privatized. But imagine what would happen. I mean, it's clear that if we can just shift our mindset from the private mode to public development, public interest research and development and product development, I mean, we can create the entire open source economy in a year. I mean, you just need a tiny fraction of energy, well, the number being 1%, according to the cunning calculation they presented. But the idea of the funding model that we're after is to have it bootstrap funded and therefore highly replicable. It does not depend on you having a sugar daddy with money to do that. Anyone can do that. So the responsibility is on you to learn the skills which we're producing openly. People can take the immersion from us. Also, they can access the resources online as well for free. So anyone at the level of can get engaged in whatever level they can choose. Typically, the people with money, they like to spend their money to compress time. So for people with money, the idea of paying for immersion training makes sense. Well, we don't want to leave out the people without money, but they can do that too. If they have time, they can study all the materials and do just as well. So this is not exclusive for any kind of a wealth mode income range, yeah. So transitioning to the ethical economy. We call the open source economy the ethical economy because it's based on getting rid of greed, getting to collaboration, solving pressing world issues. What I envision for the OSE campuses, we call that, the OSE campus, is that each campus takes on a very deliberate stab at some global pressing issue and works on it. The work that we do funds that kind of development, and we kill off problems faster than they're created. So there's many problems you can think of. Let's tackle all of them as a collaborative effort. So that's the goal, to build the facilities that have a low-cost, open-source, education campus-like existence. They produce and they work deliberately on solving issues that otherwise would not be funded. So it's about Yeah, I mentioned in one of my videos about, well, what would it look like if we truly had appropriate technology? Well, I envisioned the concept of 2 hours of work per day to make a modern standard of living. That's about 25% of the time. I think it's completely feasible. It's not technically impossible. It's the kind of efficiencies that we've seen. You can go through the numbers, okay, how much wheat and apples can you grow in so much time with given equipment? How fast can you build a house and build your machines? And I don't see a case that we should be working our whole lives slaving to make a living. That should be just a small part, and then we can focus on what's truly important to us. That would be a different world, a world based on pursuit of self-determination, not the need to survive. So that's what I look forward to, and I think that could be attractive to people. But you have to ask the question, okay, is there a real business model, or do the numbers add up to that? Well, we're doing the work to find out. I think the numbers are adding up, and that's why I'm pretty optimistic about all of this. I mean, all the productivity, it's been better than expected. I mean, machines do work. There's energy slaves, like we got fuels, solar energy. I mean, people have just amazing capacity to produce today. So productivity is absolutely not an issue. And that's evidenced by the fact that how much percent of the world is advertising? It's a huge, huge sector. We have too many products. There's overproduction. But something went awry in a system that's not really working, and people are still working too hard to make a living. Not right. So, yeah, financial feedback loops, that's the thing. How do you create viable enterprise models? It has to end up with ethical economy, right livelihoods for people. Yeah, and people need to step up to build it. So get involved. You can scan that, opensourceecology.org. You can email me. And that's about it. So let's open this up to questions, if anyone has any questions. And what I'd really love to see is collaboration sprout up, that somebody from this town runs one of the cordless drill enterprises and shows right here, shows for Spain that it's doable, and everyone else is going to start doing it for different things. So the world is green. Okay, thank you. Yeah, do we have any questions in the audience?
I was wondering how many of the machines that you at the first time envisaged like relies on digital technology. So how many of those, which is more or less the percentage?
That are what? That are digital?
Yeah, needs some kind of digital technology and electronics. So I'm thinking about self-sufficient means, so like which kind of much more analogic, and you can really like...
I'm not getting it. You're saying which ones can be made using digital fabrication, or no, I'm missing it.
Precisely the opposite. Yeah.
Okay.
How many of those?
Yeah, I mean, you can run each of them without, I guess without the CNC machines, yeah, you can't, you gotta have controllers. Otherwise, you're doing manual work, which is slower. But for example, for the brick press, the people that you've seen there, they actually built it just by hand. We do have the full digital cutting files, so a person with a CNC torch table can do it. But yeah, I think just about everything there, that's actually a good question. I haven't really thought about that one so much, but you can make, like the brick press, you can run manually with manual levers, or you can use a controller for it. You can have a tractor that you drive as an operator, or a remote control tractor. So I think there's a lot that can be done without. And why do you think that's important?
I just was thinking about this idea of self-sufficiency. So basically, as we discussed, like electronics and digital devices requires some kind of technology that for make it, let's say, at home.
Right.
Of course, you will need a lot of tools and so on. But I was just wondering how many of these designs were using just analog technologies.
Yeah. No, we like to use Arduinos wherever we can. And the other reason too is like, it's about technological recursion, that if we can't build that right now, in the future there's no limit to the things we can start producing. So, for example, photovoltaic panels, that's on our roadmap. We don't have that technology to build that right now, but we will. So you're getting into semiconductors there, and semiconductor devices, that's what microchips are. There's not really a reason why that cannot be done in like you talk about autonomy, if that's self-sufficiency. Well, all the stuff in the world, like if you talk about access to all these materials, I mean, everything is pretty high-tech these days. So just saying, oh, well, what about not using Arduinos or not using digital? I don't know, all the other systems that produce all the other stuff kind of depend on it. So I'm not sure if self-sufficiency is really an accurate way to describe that. Because, like, for example, steel, like if we have steel, someone will have to have melted it and maybe machined it using CNC equipment. I mean, there's a lot of tool chains that are hidden that we don't see.
Big interdependence, right? Between everybody, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically you answered my question, so.
Yeah, I haven't, I should get a more specific answer to that. You caught me. Yeah.
You're gonna have to apologize. I'm gonna have to apologize myself, Marcin, because I think this might be more of a point rather than a question. I could try to turn it with a high note in the end and turn it into a question, but I'll just be honest. It's a note. So observing open source designs over the last 8 years, I think what we're beginning to see is that ultimately people pay for convenience. So open sourcing your design is not going to hit or affect your bottom line. People who want to make your design ultimately are either going to be part of your developer community, and in fact, you know, making business models on the education of that makes total sense, or because they can't afford your design and they weren't going to buy your design in the first place. Then, what I notice is that those designs that are open source, you can facilitate it, the market of convenience, by saying, okay, are you ready to absorb the cost of assembly? We can send you a kit, because we will fabricate the parts and, you know, get the components in a kit. So that part we take care, but you pay a price for that, the kit price. Then a step up. Do you want me to make it for you? It's not only fabricate it, assemble it, and ship it to you, then it's X price. And then what I think you can market the most is, do you want it custom? Because then you actually can put a heftier, you know, price on that. And I see that with, for example, Aqua Pioneers that are on Wikifactory. Aqua Pioneers is a really beautiful aquaponics kit, quite a small kit, and they have brands knocking on their door saying, ooh, I like your kits, but I want it to be 10 meters by 2 meters. And they're like, great, well, here's a price tag. And because they know it's nice green face or nice big brand, they charge a good amount for those custom gigs. So I think there's something of a market here, like you pay for convenience. Do you want something made just for you? Because that's the thing, like people still, you know, I think it's fine to market on that. So like those who are not willing to make it or assemble it or, you know, learn from it, by all means, you know, pay for it and pay a good price for it. But for those who want to make it themselves and absorb the whole supply chain for them, make it open. It won't affect the bottom line. That's my hopeful thesis.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't see any evidence against that. There's plenty of ways to make money with open hardware. I don't think any of what you said is inconsistent. I mean, you just have to come up with a creative business model. Just point to, okay, where are you capturing value? And you can capture value in so many different places in the open source world. Yeah, from the standard, like you just sell a simple product, customization, DIY services, education, it could be anything. Yeah, I'd like to see, like, for example, one thing that would be a good business model is corporate extreme building retreats for team building. That'll be great. They'll pay a lot of money.
another question, sorry, Marcin. So the other day, I heard that for every person that turns vegan in the US, there's 7 new meat eaters in China, which is interesting. I love the talk because in that talk that I heard this quote from, they said, okay, this is actually an opportunity for clean meat. The West has a perception on clean meat, and if we tell them laboratory cultivated meat, they go, ugh. Actually, they don't think the way that we treat, pigs is ugh. They think, ugh, disgusting, it's been developed in a clean lab. But okay. But the point is that the Chinese have no different, like if you're a new meat eater, you don't know what's, the difference between a really good steak and a clean meat steak. So my question to you is, because in my past, prior to Wiki Factory, I had an initiative which was all about boosting entrepreneurship in rural towns in Spain. The idea of a self-sustaining village is my ultimate dream, and you guys are making it happen. But I do wonder, is it better to inspire, say, towns at risk or rural towns at risk, or is it actually easier and perhaps more effective to think about the towns that are to become? In fact, those that don't exist, just an idea, thought.
I mean, we're certainly taking it as from towns that don't exist. I mean, we settled on a blank piece of land, and in other places, I mean, you have to also fight the poverty or the inertia there. So I'd say creating from new places is definitely a good start, and then eventually there'll be a clear case for the depressed communities. There'll be a very clear business model. Okay, here's what you can do. You can get training and support. But right now, as far as developing, it's easier to start from scratch, from a clean slate, because you have more flexibility and not the inertia, Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yes, I just wanted to know what are your thoughts of incorporating other like-minded projects? First thing that comes to mind is the precious plastic project into your ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take anything that's open source. For example, we've built the precious plastic, so we're iterating on that. Anything that's open source and available to use, we use it. Arduinos, laser saw, laser cutter, and yeah, we definitely want to use it and hopefully collaborate on development. That's the ideal case. Yeah. So for precious plastic, I mean, we're pretty much started with their design, built it, and then we're iterating for the next version. So, and that can go back to their community. So definite potential, but there's just not, my statement on that is there's just not too many of those projects we can build on right now at this point. Because a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of open source projects, once they reach a product, they become proprietary. That's a common thing that happens. So it's actually very rare to find a really good design. Yeah. But we build up on it, modify it whenever. So we're all working together and effectively. Yeah. Yeah.
¿Alguna más? Bueno, pues, thank you very much, Marcin.